such as the Salmon River, Little Salmon, Oswego River, Grindstone Creek, lots of stuff like that. We want to stock them in the mouths of these creeks oftentimes, so they'll return to those creeks and go back and forth between the lake and their various whatever tributary we put them in. So they're out there living in Lake Ontario and will return back to the tributaries, hopefully, that we stocked them into. Some of these species spawn multiple times, so they'll go back and forth multiple times, like your rainbow trout there. The salmons, the Chinook and coho, they only spawn one time. So they're only making that trip back once in their life, and then once they spawn, they die. So you can see we're talking hundreds of thousands of fish that are stocked in Oswego County alone. And that, doesn't even factor in, your little tiny trout streams, the number of walleye that we put in Oneida Lake, things of that nature. So that number is actually much, much higher. So, and lastly, I just wanted to talk about some of the resources. Again, a lot of stuff on here, but it's just kind of to highlight it. If you go to our website, there's several different things that you can look for to show, well, where can I go fishing in Oswego County to target some of these fish? We have fishing access maps. We have boat launch sites that will even give you down to like the coordinates if it's a little bit confusing of where it might be on, like if it says Oswego River boat launch, there could be multiple ones. So you might want to go to a specific one. We also have a really cool tool called the DEC Info Locator. It's basically sort of like a GIS-esque system where you can put different layers over each other. So if you're looking for parking spots to go fishing, you can click parking areas to go fishing and they'll all pop up. And they can also show you like where we stock fish, the rough time of year when we stock fish. It might be like we stock brown trout in the third week of May in a specific creek. So at least gives you sort of a small time frame that you could, if you want to get out there and target some fish. So this thing's really cool. It goes way beyond fishing as well. You can look up places to camp, hike, all that. It's really, really great. But all these are available on our website, just with like a simple, search in the search bar up at the top. The other thing is we do have an app that you can get on your phone. It's the Hunt Fish New York app. And pretty much the fishing related portion of it is called the tackle box. It works pretty well. It's pretty cool. You can click on a water body. It'll detail what species are in that water body. And it's really nice to kind of like look at a map and go, where can I go? Or what do I want to target? That sort of thing. So those resources are out there to help you target some of these fish to, for recreationally, or if you want to harvest them and take them home to consume. And that's it for me.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions for Peter? All right. Well, thank you, Peter. Was there a question? Warren?
Is there any chance the walleye regulations would go back down to 15, say, on Seaway?
Up in the St. Lawrence? Probably not, because it's a wild fishery, so our wild fisheries tend to have the larger size limit in general. If you're supplementing with stocking, that's a lot of times when there's that lower size limit, like on Oneida Lake, but I find that unlikely to happen, yeah.
And you certainly calculated it right, because I always catch 17.
That's like, that's fairly common in a lot of water bodies, like Whitney Point Reservoir. It's 18 inches and most of the fish aren't keepers. It's just a time thing, and yeah.
Well done. Yep. Thanks, Peter. Oh, question?
This may be outside your specific area, but what's the economic impact of the tourism and the sport fishing and things? Do you have an idea within the region?
I have a general idea. So they do a survey essentially. The DEC does a survey every 10 years. It should be again in 2027. And don't hold me to the exact number, but it's for Oswego County, it's something like 90 million. And that's basically calculated with like sales tax, hotel tax, time spent by anglers, It's like a whole things, stuff thrown into one pot and then they come up with a number. It's harder to like break it down by different water bodies, but as like a county as a whole, it's like the last time I think it was around 90.
Big number.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Peter. If there's any questions from our online participants, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Barry's monitoring that in the back. All right, so now I'd next like to transition over and we'll invite up the Department of Health. We've got Colleen Parker and Audrey Van Gechten here to share a little bit about their fish health program.
Audrey's gonna kick us off, but just as an introduction, my name is Colleen Parker. I work for the Fish Advisory Program within the New York State Department of Health. I've been with this Department of Health for a little over 6 years now.
Audrey Van Gechten. I work very closely with Colleen's bureau. I'm more on the outreach side. So we do all the design work and all the networking to try to get our fish advisories out to the public. I've been with the department since 2010, much doing just fish advisory work. So how many folks here are anglers? All right, that's a fair number. Do we have any like charter captains or folks that do any sort of commercial? No? Okay, I was just curious. So we've been working to set advice and essentially help people make healthy choices about which fish to eat with the Department of Health for really the Fish Advisory Program is over 50 years old. We work really closely with our partners at DEC. DEC is the group that collects the fish, analyzes the fish, and then passes Department of Health the data. They have a very robust statewide monitoring program that covers about 1,500 different fish from 50 different locations every year. And that's in addition to sampling programs that are designed to help monitor like environmentally contaminated sites like Superfund sites or sites that have recently had spills. And we work closely with both DEC and EPA on many of those sites across New York State. So there's oftentimes a lot of questions about how DOH is looking at the fish themselves. A lot of people think, oh, well, they just like blend fish whole and that's how they're looking at it. But in fact, DEC uses what's called the standard fillet procedure. And so that includes the fillet, the skin, and the ribs. A lot of anglers do still like to keep the skin on fish. They may grill it with the skin on. And so we need to be able to take into account sort of the worst case scenario because some of these chemicals stay in the fat of fish, especially. The other reason why this is an important procedure, like an important protocol, we all know that people have different filleting skills, right? And so this really helps to standardize that process and make sure that one tech isn't taking all the skin and fat off or all the, like the belly flap or something. So it helps to just kind of keep it more standardized from person to person so that we get really robust data sets. There are some exceptions, including things like catfish, where the skin may be really hard to grind, or things like smelt that are actually eaten whole by a lot of anglers, where we would consider whole fish. But for the most part, we're really just considering the parts that are included in the standard fillet when we're looking at fish data.
So how does DOH use the data? Advisories are issued based on a risk management approach. We consider the contaminant levels against our guidelines. In addition to the quality and quantity of the data, some species of fish are more likely to accumulate chemicals than others. We also look at trends over time. Like Audrey said, our program has been in existence for about 50 years. We're looking at all of the data. However, we don't always necessarily base our advisories based on 50 years worth of data. It's just not possible. But we also have special considerations for sensitive populations, and we work on balancing the benefits of eating fish versus the risk of exposure. So there's about 150 waters in New York State that have specific advice. These waters had data showing fish concentrations above the DOH guidelines, in addition to other factors as well. The main chemicals of concern in New York State are PFOS, PCBs, and mercury. And our advisories depend on where you fish, who you are, and what you catch. So there's a difference between the general and sensitive population advisories. So who you are, why do we have different advice for a sensitive population? And this is considered to be children under 15 and people who can become pregnant under 50. Children are sensitive during development. They have different metabolisms, and chemicals can accumulate, staying in the body. Many chemicals found in fish can be passed from the mom to the baby in utero or through breast milk. And many chemicals are considered a special risk to children. Like lead, it's not good for anyone, but it's especially bad for children. So common chemicals in New York State fish and the health concerns. So start us off, we have PCBs or polychlorinated biphenyls. About half of the New York State fish consumption advisories are due to PCBs. They're a mixture of chlorinated compounds used as electrical coolants and lubricants. There's about 209 congeners. They're highly persistent in the environment and in fish. Although they were banned in the 1970s, we still find them worldwide and also within fish in New York. The half-life in the body depends upon the congeners, could be up to 20 years or months, spanning all the way to decades. So the concern about PCBs in fish, they build up in fat. So fish can have thousands of times the levels of PCBs that we see in water. Generally, food is the primary source of PCB exposure for the public, and contaminated fish can contain high levels of PCBs. Some populations are more at risk because they eat more fish, recreational anglers, ethnic and low-income communities as well. Overall, we are seeing a decline across New York State, although we do see levels that are above these guidelines, like I mentioned. So at high levels of exposure in animals, PCBs can cause cancer and a variety of non-cancer health effects. In humans, there's evidence for cancer and non-cancer health effects from PCBs. The caveat is that human studies are more complicated than animal studies. The EPA classifies PCBs as a probable human carcinogen. The IARC, which is the International Agency for Research on Cancer, considers them carcinogenic to humans. Worker studies have shown evidence of melanoma, some evidence for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and breast cancer, and the EPA and ATSDR also note liver cancer. So PCBs and dioxins build up in the skin and fat of the fish. People who eat fish can reduce chemicals in fish by removing the skin and fat and cooking so the fat drips off. We're seeing up to a 50% reduction through your cooking method. And this advice is problematic for many ethnic groups as they prefer to use the whole fish. So we recommend avoiding eating eating fish with high levels of PCBs like catfish, carp, and sometimes walleye. So mercury, at high levels, mercury can cause damage to the brain and kidneys. There are 3 forms of mercury: elemental, inorganic, and organic mercury. In aquatic systems, inorganic mercury is methylated by microorganisms to methylmercury. This form is readily bioaccumulated, and it can occur in a variety of waters, including man-made and flighted water bodies or reservoirs. So we have mercury-based regional advisories. The Catskills and the Adirondack regions are considered biological hotspots for mercury. We typically see higher levels of mercury in these areas of New York. And then in addition to that, we have a statewide advisory that is based on mercury. So if you are fishing outside one of these regional advisory zones and you are in a water that doesn't have a specific advisory, the statewide mercury advice will apply to that water. So certain fish like walleye, pike, and smallmouth bass tend to be highest in mercury. Our statewide advice is pretty conservative in being protective of those species. So how does mercury get into the environment? It's kind of a little bit of a complex diagram, but it's just showing that there's different sources of mercury and inputs into the environment, and then subsequent input into our waters. There we go. The highest mercury emissions by sector is through the artisanal and small scale mining, and then second to that through the combustion of coal. So it is estimated that 80 to 90% of methylmercury in the body is from seafood consumption. Methylmercury affects the nervous system. It's a concern for developing nervous systems. That's why we have that sensitive population advice. And it can potentially affect children's memory, attention, and language development. Has a half-life in the body of about 50 days. And then lastly, PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. There are chemicals that are used for firefighting foams, nonstick materials, manufacturing, and many other applications. They're persistent in the environment. They can accumulate in living things, including fish and crabs. Polyfluorooctane sulfonate, or PFOS, tends to accumulate in fish more than the other PFAS that we test for. Human studies show associations between PFOS and health effects similar to those seen in animals. So we have seen liver effects, immune system effects, developmental effects, increased cholesterol levels, pregnancy-induced hypertension or preeclampsia. In 2024, the EPA released a PFOS human health risk assessment, and they indicated that PFOS is likely to be carcinogenic to humans. Other health agencies have declared that PFOS is carcinogenic to humans as well. So these are common chemicals that we find in New York. And as far as relative to fish, PCBs can build up in the skin and fat of fish. Like I mentioned earlier, we can reduce by filleting and cooking so the fat drips off. You can get up to about a 50% reduction. And mercury is found throughout the muscle or the fillet. You cannot remove that by cooking. So we must use advisories to choose fish with lower mercury. And then for PFOS, it's found in the liver, brain, blood, and muscle tissue. Communities that eat whole fish are more at risk than those traditionally that just eat the fillet. It is non-lipophilic or fat-loving. PFAS tend to bind to protein, particularly in the liver and the blood. We also advise to choose fish lower in PFOS. That's back to Audrey.
So how do we get the word out to folks? So we do a lot of different events to try to get this advice out to the fishing public. Our program really attends dozens of public events throughout the year. We speak with thousands of anglers between all the county fairs and hunting and fishing shows that we try to attend, in addition to presentations like this one, where we get to chat with folks. And through those events, we really have the opportunity to both test and improve our materials, learn about what anglers are eating, because it is different depending on the community and where we are in the state, and just try to expand our network through this work so that we can continue to distribute our materials. And so we have a whole suite of free regional brochures that can be ordered right from our website. I have a couple of our brochures out on the table. I have the St. Lawrence and the Finger Lakes brochures with me today. These are all set up by fish, which is pretty cool. You go to the opening page and essentially there's like all the photos of fish, and you go to that page and it lists all the advisories in that region for the fish that you may be targeting. We also try to make sure that our materials are available in many languages, especially Hudson River, Hudson Valley, and New York City is available in like 5 or 6 different languages. Most of the rest of the brochures are also available in Spanish at the very least. And then we have a really nice, whoa, hold on. Got a little excited there. Okay. We have a really nice translation bar that's also available on our website. Now it's a drop down, but it does the same thing. So like if somebody who spoke Spanish went to our website, they could just click translate to Spanish, and then every link that they clicked on this website from there would just automatically translate into Spanish. So that's a pretty nice feature. And then this is about the time of year where you'll typically see our press releases go out about what has changed for the year. We update the website, update the brochures, update all the languages. So we're in the thick of it right now, but we're almost on at the end. And we do have like a mailing list that folks can sign up for if they want to be alerted, like when all the info is updated and they can order. We spend a lot of time answering where can I eat that fish, because it's nice that we tell people where there are chemicals and where they should limit what they're eating. But people want to know, like, where can I eat my fish meal? Fish are obviously a very healthy part of a diet. Fishing itself is very important just for mental health, frankly, and to just be outside in nature. So that we're not interested in keeping people from eating fish or fishing. We're really trying to promote it as much as we can, but just to make smart choices and make healthy choices. And we know that positive messaging really encourages people to follow the advice, right? Because we're giving them concrete info that they can use to help their families determine where they can actually eat fish. So we have a series of county maps that are color coded based on the advisories. These are public fishing waters typically. And we give sort of like the 10,000 foot view. And then if you want like specific public fishing rights on a stream or something, then you can go to the DEC's Trout Finder or Info Locator to find out exactly, where the parking area and stuff is. Essentially, these are family-based maps, so we are really highlighting the waters that are in the light blue or the purple, and telling families to avoid fishing from the waters that are in red. Those typically have more restrictive advisories for the families. And the advice applies up to the first impassable barrier. And so that can be tricky to figure out for, your lay angler who may just be choosing to go to a new place. So these maps do try to help people understand where an advisory applies up to, for the most part. And this is an ongoing project that we've been working on. We have about 21 counties mapped, and then we have, we're always trying to add more. So I don't have Oswego, unfortunately, done, but we're working steadily north and west. And then we do have we have sort of our city centers done across the western part of the state as well. And something that we consider a lot in our outreach program is that cultural differences can really drive exposure and risk. So our newcomers are often less aware of contamination in general. They may not know the historical, contamination history of one of our local waters, like Onondaga Lake or the Hudson River. DOH, generally, we need to rely on our community partners to really identify and connect with these groups. Trust is really an ongoing issue with government groups. If an angler sees somebody coming up with a clipboard on the waterfront, that's not usually the best time to engage with folks to chat. They're usually pretty focused on trying to get their fish. They also may be engaged in cultural practices that put them more at risk. So they may eat whole fish. They may prefer fatty species of fish like catfish or carp. They may be making fish paste out of whole fish, or they may be preferring a part of the fish or crab, in this case, like crab tamale, that tends to have higher levels of contaminants. There's oftentimes pretty intense language and literacy barriers that we have to really think outside the box and develop new strategies to be able to help communicate. And then some newcomers are just eating substantially more local fish than average licensed anglers. Average licensed angler is eating about 16 local fish meals a year. I would say that's low for the Great Lakes in general, but that's average. Some of our Burmese refugees, for example, they were eating over 150 fish meals a year out of Syracuse when they did a biomonitoring study in 2016. So we've tried to work a lot towards reaching the hard to reach. Essentially, over the years, we've tried to learn directly from many of these groups. As you see, we've expanded resources into additional languages and tried to improve our website. We work directly with community partners that may be working with some of these newcomers, and they help us identify what languages they may be speaking. We'll do presentations and give basic presentations at English as a new language classes and work with different community groups that may be offering English classes. We work with refugee resettlement organizations, Hispanic community groups, and we have ongoing work as well with our tribal nations. We just wrapped up a really big project with our Burmese and Karen speaking anglers. So those are both sort of Burmese diaspora out of Myanmar. Many of those refugees have been in the country now for 10 to 15 years. And they have very limited literacy, even in their own language. It's mostly a spoken word type language. And so we developed special regional guides for them and ended up making an animated how-to video to help sort of accommodate those literacy issues. We have actually a Burmese and Karen landing page on our website, which was really interesting because even just being able to display those languages on an HTML website was really challenging, and there was very little information out there, but we managed to do it. And we were able to do a paid social media campaign in the fall that promoted those videos in some of our bigger cities where there's a really big population of folks, thousands and thousands of folks live in Utica and Buffalo and Albany. So it's a really great community. They really, they're very law-abiding folks. They want to follow the info, but it's literally just they don't have access to the info in a traditional way. So I'm just going to touch a little bit about the Great Lakes updates. I don't know how much time I have left.
About 15 minutes.
Oh, okay,
We're
great.
ahead schedule, so take your time.
So Colleen mentioned that EPA came out with a new RFD for PFAS. New York State is also part of the Great Lakes Consortium, which has essentially our fisheries scientists and toxicologists from all the Great Lakes states, the province of Ontario, and the tribal nations that border the lake. And as part of a PFOS guideline reassessment, the Great Lakes Consortium essentially made new guidelines for PFOS in particular. And so New York adopted those new, more protective guidelines last year. They are higher than what the EPA recommended. The EPA recommendation was very, very low, to the point where it would be what we thought overly restrictive, especially because of some of the benefits of eating fish also help to outweigh or protect a little bit of some of those PFAS effects as well. But as you can see at the bottom of the slide, our previous guidelines, the do not eat was 200 parts per billion, and that went down to 40 parts per billion. So it is a considerable drop. So at this point, there was a reassessment that happened this year in Colleen's group. And so we looked at the data that we had that was existing and essentially reapplied those guidelines to our current water bodies. And so that resulted in some changes. So Lake Erie, unfortunately, the walleye and the yellow perch both came back with some PFAS. So those have dropped down to a 1 meal per month for everybody. I'll say that the good news is that there were some studies that were done, and it seems to show that the peak of PFAS in the Great Lakes was 2010.
2008.
2008. Okay, so the peak of PFAS was about 2008, and up until like really the past 3 years or so, DEC had been doing less PFOS testing. They had sort of been doing like a spot check across the state, and now they're doing much more robust sampling. So we are constantly getting more data, and based on that assessment, we're hoping that perhaps these levels will come down in the next couple of years, and we'll be able to relax those advisories. For Lake Ontario, only lake trout was affected. And again, we're in discussions with all our regional managers at DEC to discuss what data we have, what data we need, what fish species are missing. So that's something that we're working really closely together on to make sure that we're getting enough data to make sure that we have a robust data set for these very large lakes, and we understand what's going on and where this PFAS is coming from as well, if possible. And then what is considered a meal? It's an 8-ounce fillet is what we consider a meal. So it's about the size of your hands. And just a reminder that the advice for the lake will also apply to the tributaries up to the first impassable barrier. And that could also include something like a culvert or a waterfall, or even like a riffle section that certain fish aren't going to get over. And we usually work with the regional fisheries managers on their waters. Once we complete a map, we kind of have them help us spot check it to make sure what we're listing makes sense. And these maps are available. If you go to our homepage, there's like a box down at the bottom that says advisory maps by county, and you can get right to those. And again, like Colleen mentioned, for waters that do not have specific advisories, we fall back to the statewide advice. So if there's no advisory listed for that water, and you caught, for example, a smaller walleye, it would be 4 meals per month for the general population and 1 meal per month for the sensitive population. And 4 meals a month is pretty much the max that we recommend in New York State. That's both because there may be unknown chemicals that we're going to find out about in the near future, and also because we really can't test every water that's out there, and we may not have data for that water. Some states will have like an unlimited category, but we max out at 4 meals per month is what is recommended. Whirlwind.
Great. Thank you, Colleen and Audrey. Any questions? Yep. Yeah.
So I know a lot of this information is for individual anglers or for residential anglers. And I know particularly like from a commercial standpoint, because I am a restaurant owner and I do order from lots of different places. And walleye is something typically that I can find and get in large quantities. And I do know that there isn't necessarily a commercial industry in like Ontario anymore, and I know most of it comes out of like Missouri and Superior and sometimes Lake Erie. So a lot of these health guidelines, if I were to look from a commercial standpoint, none of these are readily available. So if I, for instance, order, I don't know, 20 pounds of walleye, and then I'm feeding an entire, weekend's worth of people the same exact fish, and people come back, are these type of health advisories or recommendations still applicable for a commercial standpoint, or is it
So
not?
it's
Yeah.
more, at that point, it's more on the consumer than it is on you. So in New York State, from New York State waters, there is a new law that went into effect a couple years ago that if a water has like a don't eat advisory on it for the general population, you're not allowed to commercially sell, or the restaurant is not allowed to buy it essentially from that fishery. But if you're buying it from out of state and it's like it's a registered fishery or whatever, and you have all the paperwork, it's really on the consumer to know that like, well, walleye is typically a fish that has a lot of mercury no matter where, it's like, it'd be the same as swordfish. Honestly, some of our walleye from the Adirondacks have essentially as much mercury as shark.
And so, Jeff, I can add to that for commercial seafood and commercially purchased caught seafood, that is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And there are strict requirements around ensuring the products you're sourcing are safe. That does cover environmental contaminants. And so producers that are purchasing those products are going to be required to have a HACCP plan in place. And if that species is identified in the hazards guide as one that has these environmental contaminants associated with it, they will have to do their due diligence in determining that they are actually harvesting product and sourcing product that is below the published thresholds. So it is regulated on the federal level for all commercial processors. And that goes any species there's a guide, Fish and Fishery Products Hazards and Controls Guidance. In that guide, it has a list of the variety of different species and also lists all of the potential hazards associated with them. Any potential hazard associated with the species they are working with, they need to assess to determine whether it's a significant hazard. And if it is, they need to implement specific controls for that. And environmental chemicals are included in that. So, and FDA also does a lot of testing on commercial species as well. Yeah.
And I'll add that in general, like we have a couple waters in New York State that they just have lower mercury. So like actually the Great Lakes are 2 of them, and then also Oneida Lake, for example. So I don't know, like, the status of Lake Superior or anything. I'm very New York focused. But in the past, we've been able to essentially have a more relaxed advisory for our yellow perch and our walleye than we have for the statewide advisory from, like, for example, Lake Erie. Lake Ontario, there was the added complication of the 18-inch minimum, because for us, we want to try to point people towards the smaller fish within regulation size, but our cutoff is 19 inches. So it doesn't make sense to have like 1 inch of fish, that people can kind of juggle between. So we had to just like kind of make the more restrictive advice for walleye. But that is something that you can always contact if you're curious, right? You can always contact the state health department. Like they all have fairly robust testing programs along the Great Lakes.
Cool, thank you. And also, are you sourcing directly from the harvester or from a distributor?
I would generally, it's very difficult for me to harvest directly from someone who catches it locally unless it's very particular, like if you are like on Long Island to define it, but like here, no.
Because
That's not a chance.
You can also ask, and depending on how far down the line it was between your distributor and caught, you can ask to see HACCP plans and ask them how they're controlling that. And if not, they could maybe even get it from where they're getting it from. But sometimes in the seafood supply chain, there are many players that it's hard to track back to that primary harvester, which is where that hazard would have to be controlled. And you wouldn't see it reflected down the line in a HACCP plan. Any other questions? Yeah, Laura?
Are there any human subjects going on in terms of tracking mercury levels or PFAS in some of these populations that are eating large amounts?
Yeah, so so nationally, NHANES has historically tracked some of those chemicals. Right now, CDC actually did 5 very, very large, sort of longer term biomonitoring projects, that they awarded it to 5 different states, and New York was one of those. So that study is ongoing right now, and essentially they're recruiting people from, communities that have had impacts from PFAS, and asking them like a slew of questions, and then they're essentially doing urine and blood testing, and sort of they're going to follow them to see sort of like if there's health outcome changes. So that all that information is actually available right on the website. If you search Biomonitor New York, a lot of it will come up. Yeah, so there's a lot of, I mean, essentially there's like entire groups from every state that are just focused on PFAS at this point, whether it's fish or human health or drinking water, remediation, like it's just like, it's the biggest thing essentially right now. And for people that are curious, like a lot of our PFAS contamination that gets into waterways tends to come from emergency management training facilities or airports where like firefighting foam was used. Oftentimes they have like retention ponds, and previously wasn't really that well regulated. So it moves very easily through water. And so it would end up getting into either drinking water supplies or from these retention ponds into streams, into our bigger waters. So AFFF is the name of the foam, and they've been phasing it out. But I think that in some situations, they still have to use it because it is very, very effective at fighting, especially like the jet fuel fires and stuff like that. But if there are emergency training facilities, around your favorite water, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And it's something that DEC is doing still a lot of, spot testing and checking on, and we're constantly getting more data.
As far as the fish testing, I think we began testing for PFAS in 2010, and then it kind of picked up around 2016. But I would say in the last 10 years, we have like an in-house state lab, and they've developed a methodology to be able to actually test for PFAS now. So it's becoming more regular and routine in our sampling. I would say prior to maybe 2020, we were getting like fish here and there with PFAS. So we're really like rapidly trying to add data for PFAS across the state and try to track down trends and localize possible.
Maybe take one more quick question if there is one. All right, well, thank you, Colleen and Audrey.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, so next I'll invite Barry, our aquaculture specialist up with New York Sea Grant. He's going to give you an overview of aquaculture activities happening across New York State. Barry.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Mike mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about summarize the aquaculture industry and then also talk about our extension efforts to support it. So just a general overview of what the aquaculture industry in New York looks like. There's 3 main categories. We've got shellfish and seaweed being raised in the marine region around Long Island. Finfish operations do exist statewide. Most of them are in the upstate region. There's only a couple on Long Island. They're all currently land-based. There isn't anything offshore. There's someone trying to get an offshore operation going, but they're in what I've been calling regulatory purgatory. So the industry is comprised of entities from the private, collegiate, governmental, nonprofit sectors. Products are raised for food, for restoration, for stocking, water quality improvement purposes. And according to the 2023 aquaculture census, the value of the industry had almost doubled since the 2018 census, at a value of $15.5 million. So that gets done every 5 years. So there'll be a couple more years before we get an updated version of that. So the shellfish industry, there's about 55 operations. Most are from the private sector, which raise oyster for food purposes. The municipal and nonprofit entities also raise oyster, as well as clam, bay scallop, and rib mussel. All of these are for restoration purposes. There's about 45 commercial oyster farmers. Most of them are small operations, working lease sites, about maybe 10 acres or less in size. So this map of the island shows stars where all the various hatcheries are that produce the shellfish seed. So yellow are municipal, the 3 private ones in teal, and nonprofits in brown. So those hatcheries produce the seed that oysters that farmers are raising. Those farms, the locations are kind of spread around the island. Most of them are on the east end of Long Island. These are, there's more farms than there are actually shown here. But so these are all where your oyster farms, and then some of these are also raising seaweed. The seaweed industry is relatively new in New York. It's primarily focused on sugar kelp. There's about 21 operations that are permitted. Most of those are actually all nonprofits or municipalities. In 2023, the first commercial permit was actually issued. 2 more followed in 24. Only one, so there's actually only 2 people actively raising them. Part of that is because there isn't much of a market available. There's been a big bottleneck. They know they can raise it, but there isn't processing facilities. There isn't a sustainable market for it. So I brought an example. Some of them have been drying it out, using it for fertilizer enhancement purposes. But hopefully that's going to start to improve in the next couple of years. And so a similar map showing the hatcheries that are producing the spools that the seaweed are raised on. And it's following the same color scheme as the other one: municipal in yellow, private in teal, nonprofits in brown. And then there's one green operation that does a lot of research. And so this shows where all those operations are following that same color scheme. You can see there's actually quite a few nonprofits around New York City raising for improving water quality. So the finfish sector of the industry has about 41 operations. Most are raising fish to stock public and private waterways. There's a few selling fish for food. There's several species of trout and salmon are produced, as well as, oh, that's right, never mind. As well as many species of game and bait fish. The sector also includes aquaponic operations that raise various types of plants in conjunction with the fish. So in the finfish sector, it uses a variety of culture systems, from ponds to flow-through raceways, as well as recirculating systems. Many of the operations in New York actually use a combination of these. So this map is going to show the distribution of the operations around the state. Two small aquaponic community operations in yellow. And then lastly, in green are the 18 state and nonprofit hatcheries that that stock all the public water bodies. Many of these hatcheries and the fish they produce support the recreational fishing industry in the region. So I did want to share a couple of general updates about the finfish sector. Like many fisheries related industries, there's a lot of the farmers are getting up there in age, kind of what they're calling graying of the industry. Several have significantly reduced their production levels, and some have not really developed even succession plans. So it's possible that in the next few years, there could be several operations that start to phase out. And some of these have been around for 20 plus years. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation. Hopefully that will change in the near future. You know, there'll be a little bit more. What did I do? And also I did want to mention that there's been a handful of closures of some larger operations since 23. A lot of various reasons go into why they've closed. Losing investment support has been one of the more pervasive issues. There is some interest in some new species and some new farms. We do get calls, people reach out on, you know, how they can go about starting a farm. In particular, there's someone that he's done a pilot test. He's ready to go starting up a shrimp operation. He's just looking for investment support. Someone last year reached out. They're interested in raising crawfish or crayfish. He spent a lot of time down south and just loves crawfish, so he really wants to raise them up here. And there's another family looking to set up an aquaponics operation that they want to have also a store on their property so that they can be, you know, kind of one of those local farms that people can get fish and produce from. So I've kind of shared a lot about what the industry looks like. I also kind of want to explain what our role is, what my role is, and how that I fit into the picture, supporting the industry. we're able to work in various ways, whatever really is needed, which gives us a lot of flexibility. We're able to adapt to what's going on with the industry. A major aspect is, being able to just connect with them, meet with them, understand what their challenges are, what things are working well, what things can be, could be used, what we could do to help them improve things. Working with researchers is also very important. We have the opportunity to, hear what's going on from the farmers. When we talk to researchers, we've got the opportunity to share, hey, someone's interested in doing this. Can we do some of that research to look at that and see if that's feasible? And then bring that information back to the farmers, creating educational opportunities for the public, and even setting up meetings for industry members, letting them have the opportunity to meet with each other for networking purposes, or even working with policymakers. We can't lobby on their behalf, but we can kind of create that platform and that opportunity where they can get to share with them what's going on. And so there are a variety of issues that the industry struggles with. Many of these are not specifically unique to New York. These were the top ones. So my predecessor had conducted a needs assessment in 2021 with the industry. So these were some of the top ones that were identified. There being no statewide aquaculture association makes it really challenging for the industry to network as a whole, and also even lobby for itself. The oyster growers on Long Island, they have a kind of consolidated association that most of them participate in, and that has recently worked for them for lobbying support. But as a statewide organization, not having that really has hindered them. There wasn't a state agency department dedicated to supporting the aquaculture industry. I'll talk a little bit about that more in a second. But and then these last ones are actually pretty general, more common in other states as well. Some of them are a lot more challenging for me as an extension agent to work upon. So I had kind of focused on these top three. But as an exciting update, I think Mike might have mentioned Josh. Josh was hired as the Ag and Markets Seafood and Aquaculture Coordinator position last year. So that was a really significant improvement and changing the landscape supporting the aquaculture industry in New York. So following that list of industry challenges, I did want to talk about some of the updates on how New York has been supporting the aquaculture industry. Just last fall, Suffolk County, which is the eastern part of Long Island, they passed a working waterfront legislation intended to preserve all of those commercial spaces to avoid them from being turned into either condos or other non-functional real estate for the industry. So that still needs to be evolved, but the fact that it's in place is really important. Josh's position getting created, that is obviously a huge one and is going to have some long-term impacts very quickly. There was over $4 million made available to the private aquaculture industry through funding. That was a really big boost. That is another example of where that organized Long Island Oyster Growers Association, they lobbied for that and they were able to get that funding directly. The state DEC hatcheries, they're getting a major upgrade. It'll be over the course of several years, but that's going to be a big boost to the recreational industry. There was another round of funding was also made through New York Grown and Certified program. That wasn't specific to the aquaculture industry, but the aquaculture farmers were they were eligible to apply for that. What do we got? The interagency work group was created in 2024 to identify industry needs and challenges. And that was actually Mike and I participated in that. We had the opportunity to kind of raise the long-standing need that ag and market has been something that industry's been lobbying for going back to the 80s. Like, we need more representation in this from that agency. So that was one of the big takeaways from that interagency meeting. A Long Island Town Hatchery received funding to expand their shellfish hatchery. Oyster farmers had been pointing out that there was limited amount of shellfish seed that was available. A lot of oyster farmers were buying seed from out of state. So this hatchery is supposed to be able to quadruple in size is what they're hoping for. So $10 million, hopefully that comes to fruition and they are able to expand to the size that they're intended to. And then in January of 24, a feasibility study was also funded to assess opportunities for a seafood processing facility on Long Island, and also a Long Island seafood trail to increase marketing and consumer awareness. So the last couple of years, the state has really put a nice boost of support into the industry, and hopefully that will continue on. So on the left is a handful of our major ongoing efforts. I'll go through most of these in a little bit more detail. I don't need to go into the Seafood Summit since Mike gave a nice overview of that already. So in-person meetings and virtual work groups, those were things that we developed to address the lack of an aquaculture association. Getting people in the room together to talk, network with each other has been something lacking. I host one every year for the shellfish hatchery managers. Really, just simple, getting them in a room together, host it at a brewery. We provide them a little bit of pizza, the beer's on them, but it's a good incentive to get them there. I tried doing something like that for the finfish managers up here. Last year, they wanted to meet in the wintertime. It got snowed out, so I need to pivot and figure out a little bit better time of how to make that work. But and then also hosting these virtual work group meetings. This brings industry from across the state together, at least getting a chance to connect and stay updated on what's going on. And also is a good place for us to hear some of those issues and challenges that can get worked on. Also, we created a simple and voluntary 10-question aquaculture producer survey that gets distributed every year. Because the sectors are kind of managed by different parts of DEC, none of that data is collected as a whole. So there isn't any good comparison on any one document that shows what all the finfish producers produce as well as what the shellfish producers produce. So we put this together. It is voluntary. We've done pretty well. We're getting more than half the industry to respond to it. And I do have some paper copies if you are interested in seeing more of those details. These are just a couple of graphs kind of just showing the information. The idea is that we're hoping that we can, track any growth or major changes of the industry over time. And it's also a really nice tool to use to share with policymakers or other people that can quickly summarize what the industry looks like. We've been doing recorded resource webinars instead of trying to do in-person meetings. Trying to get farmers together with guest speakers is really just logistically challenged. So this works really well. It's more convenient for them. They're recorded so they can join if it works for them during the day, or they're able to get back to it and check it out at a later time. And then we post these recordings on the Sea Grant website. Also developed a resource website kind of serving as a one-stop shop sort of place. So industry members, there's grant postings are there. The webinars are listed there, various educator related information, a list of ongoing aquaculture researches. So trying to kind of put all the relevant information in one place so it's easier for farmers, researchers, and public to learn about what's going on with New York's industry all in one place. The Great Lakes Aquaculture Collaborative is comprised of all the Sea Grant programs from the Great Lakes states to provide and develop resources and programming to benefit the aquaculture industry across the region. New York participates in this. We have a state advisory board that's comprised of industry members. It helps guide a lot of these efforts. Multiple events and products have come out of this collaborative, and I wanted to focus on the Great Lakes Fresh Fish Finder tool. So this was a website that was developed during the pandemic, prior to me starting with Sea Grant, but it was intended to help connect fish producers directly with customers. It provides free and passive advertising for any producer, processor, or commercial fisherman within the Great Lake region. In 2024, the GLAC team had reviewed the website traffic from in 2024 and found over 11,000 active users had actually used the website to look up information about the operations listed. I do keep it updated with New York's industry members. I do not have much on the way of commercial related stuff. I'm pretty sure Stacy told me that there wasn't a long list of those, but if anyone is interested from that side, we can certainly get them added to that. And then this is just a screenshot of what that website looks like. So you've got the ability to search, do different filters, in each of those orange icons. When you click on it, it pulls up the name of the operation and either a link to their website or as well as like a list of what they actually produce. And then lastly, I did just want to mention these oyster shucking workshops, maybe a little less relevant for up here in this region. But on Long Island, we started doing these. So the goal of them is to try to connect people with local oyster farmers, and as well as kind of reducing that intimidation factor on not bringing oysters home and eating them. People like to eat them out at restaurants, but the idea of opening them on their own or cooking them is a little people a little intimidated by that. So the idea is we do this. We also do it at a brewery. Keep it very casual. With a paid registration, participants get at least a dozen oysters. They get to meet the oyster farmer, hear about their story, and we just let them practice. They get a shucking knife and gloves. And in the course of about an hour and a half, they have a grand old time. Open a bunch of them. So far, we haven't had any any bloody hands or anything. Everything's been, yeah, so far it's been pretty good. But yeah, and we give them an insulated tote bag with a variety of different resources. And so far they seem to be fairly successful. Yeah. If there's any questions, obviously I'm around to chat too. Bunch of resources over there. That link takes you to the website. And most of those links are all available on there as well. Yes.
I could totally see an oyster shucking workshop, like with Wegmans or something up in these regions.
It certainly could. Part of it'd be without the oyster farmer, but
Right.
For sure, I think, there's enough. Yeah, I know you can definitely get oysters and stuff like that at some. So it could be something that, with help with like Stacy and others, we could certainly put something together. We think there would be, that value, for sure. Yes.
So the 4 businesses that closed, was local Coho the only one that was focused on like getting consumption? Fish were the other one, like Newponics was.
So
not
Newponics,
consumption, but the other.
their fish they weren't selling their fish. And we had recently, yeah, they weren't processing, but recently we had gotten them into a school in Westchester, because a kosher community school wanted New York raised whitefish. And so we had made that connection, and they were getting them to a kosher processor, and then things got weird. And I still don't know if they're coming back on or not. Yeah, Upward Farms, they closed just when I started. I wasn't sure exactly.
They were largely focused on produce. Their fish was like a byproduct.
Okay.
But I think they had just been getting into starting to find a market and develop the seafood part of that. They were about ready to do large expansion into other states, into Pennsylvania, but I don't know exactly what happened, but all of a sudden they just kind of went under and closed their doors. But they had a facility in Brooklyn, on a rooftop in Brooklyn. They had an R&D facility that they're working on that I was able to visit.
Yeah. And Cabbage Hill Farms, they were also small, more family-oriented aquaponics operation. And they just said that they were sticking more with their traditional land-based farming stuff and just have pulled away from the fish. Anyone else?
All right, thanks, Barry. All right, so next we'll transition over. Dr. Ellen Karboski with SUNY Oswego is going to give us a little overview of some of the research efforts she's been doing and how she's been working with industry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Ellen Karboski. I am a fisheries biologist and a professor here at SUNY Oswego. And I'm going to share some of the research that my students and I have been doing over the last year in collaboration with Tom Allen, who is a local seafood processor and who provided the yellow perch that you are going to be tasting today. So not only did he provide the perch for this event,
But he also provided a bunch of perch for samples for my students to be working on. So this is our effort at trying to get some data on the commercially processed perch coming out of Lake Ontario and Cayuga Lake as well. So here we are. This is our yellow perch. They are a beautiful fish, a nice yellow color, beautiful dark green bars, especially when they're spawning. They get these beautiful bright orange or red fins. So I think they're quite a photogenic fish. I like yellow perch as well. Plus they're tasty and local, which is pretty great. They are one of the most popular game fish species in New York. And one of the reasons for that is because you can catch them year round, which is really great, right? So not only can you catch them during the regular open water season in the summer, but they're also really popular, a really popular target during the ice fishing season as well. So once the lakes freeze over, you don't have to stop fishing. You can go out ice fishing and still catch our yellow perch. A lot of our other more warm water fish species kind of shut down during the winter. They're a little too cold, but the yellow perch keep moving around and keep biting on hooks. So very popular that way. They're also the fish that's found in the famous perch sandwich. So if you've ever had a perch sandwich around here, around the Great Lakes, at some of our local restaurants around, that perch often comes from Lake Ontario or some of the other inland water bodies around here. Interestingly, yellow perch, the kind of pathway that it takes to get to your plate is different than a lot of the other fish species. So a lot of fish species that you're going to buy at a restaurant or a grocery store, they've come from a commercial fisherman who has caught them using a commercial license, and they make their way through the commercial seafood pathway. But yellow perch are actually an exception to that in New York. So yellow perch, there are a couple commercial licenses still active on Lake Ontario. So a couple of people still fishing a commercial license out there. But most of the yellow perch actually is caught by recreational anglers on a recreational fishing license. And then those are sold to commercial processors like Tom, who we got our fish from. And so that's how they get to restaurants and to your plate. So it's a little bit different. Because of that, they bypass some of the monitoring and regulation pathways. So commercial fishermen are required to report how many pounds they catch, for example, where they catch things. Recreational anglers are not. So we don't have a lot of data on the yellow perch or the fish that are coming to restaurants through this pathway because they're just, recreational anglers aren't required to report how many fish they catch or sell, right? The processors themselves are regulated, but the anglers are not. We were really interested in trying to start to collect some data on these perch, see a little bit about how big they are, how fast they're growing, what ages, age structure of the population, to try and get some data on this population that's kind of ignored. So we got fish from Tom. Stacy was kind enough to be our fish matchmaker when I was out there looking for commercial perch species. And she hooked me up with Tom, who's based right here in Oswego. And he caught these perch himself, him and his buddy, just hook and line angling on both Cayuga Lake and Lake Ontario last fall. And we got them in a mix of conditions based on what Tom was able to give me. So we did purchase some whole fish from Tom because I wanted to be able to do diets and get weights and things and have some fish examples for my students to learn to dissect and work up. But a lot of our samples came to us filleted because he cuts the fillets off, and then usually he would just discard the carcasses, but instead of throwing them away, he froze them and saved them for me. So I got filleted carcasses with the meat taken off, but the heads and the spines and the fins all still attached. I also got looks like I'm missing some table on here, but at the bottom of this table, there should be a line for Cayuga Lake. And Cayuga Lake, he sent me some heads only. So he was filleting them, but then he cut the heads off and sent me just the heads. So some of our samples came from just heads, which I wasn't able to get length on, which is okay, but we were still able to age them. I'll talk a little bit about how we age them from the heads. So this is a picture of those, the whole fish that we got from Tom, and he caught them like that day. They were really fresh and beautiful. So depending on the type of sample we got, we could collect a few different types of data. So with the whole fish, we could get the most types of data, right? We could get total length by measuring the length from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. That's the total length of the fish. Because the fillets were still on, we were also able to get weight, so we could weigh the fish. And we took the stomachs out to see what they were eating, to do a diet study on them, since the whole fish was still there. And then we also pulled otoliths, and otoliths are the ear bones of fish. So just like us, fish have a set of 3 bones in each of their ears. And so we can pull those bones out, and then they grow in rings just like a tree, right? So every year that a fish lives, it puts down a new layer of mineral, of bone on that otolith. And so if we saw them in half, take a little section out and look at it under a microscope, we can actually count the rings on the otoliths and see how old the fish is. So that's why some of the samples that I got from Tom were just the heads, because I was after those otoliths. So even though it was just the head, I was still able to get age from those fish. So for fish that were filleted, we couldn't take the weight because the meat was gone, but it's okay. We still got total length, and we could pull the otoliths from the skull. And then the heads, we took the otoliths out, and we also measured something called opercular length. And opercular length is the tip of the length from the tip of the nose to the edge of the operculum, which is the bony flap that covers the fish's gills. And you can take that measurement, and using a equation from another paper, Tim et al., just Tim 2024, no et al., Tim did it himself. From Tim 2024, you could take that opercular measurement, and then it would estimate what the total length of the fish was. So we could still get an estimate of total length from just the head measurement. And then the otoliths, we took those and mounted them in a block of epoxy, and then we cut a little section out of them using a special saw, and then read them under the microscope. So these are some of the photos from my students' lab work. These are the molds we use to mount the otoliths and epoxy. And if you kind of squint, you can see there's some otoliths mounted in these blocks there. This is one of the blocks with an otolith mounted inside here in the middle of the screen. So you can see this little white bone that's mounted in the middle of that block. And then we use this Buehler isomet saw to cut a very, very thin section out of the very middle of that otolith. And then we can put it on a slide and read it by counting the rings. So this is us looking at it under the microscope. And this is actually a picture of one of those sections of otoliths. So this is one little thin section cut just out of the middle of that fish ear bone. And here in the middle, this kind of dark mass, that's what's called the origin. And that's the ear bone that existed when the fish was just a baby in the egg, right? And then after the fish hatches out of the egg, it starts to grow. It starts to lay down more mineral, more bone. And in the first year of its life, it grows really fast. And so the mineral is being laid down really quickly. And so it's a little bit transparent. So you get this kind of transparent section of growth in the first year of life. And then winter comes around, gets colder, the fish's metabolism starts to slow down. It's not eating as much, it grows slower. And so they're putting down a very thin but much denser layer of minerals because they're not growing as fast. So you go from this kind of light colored, quick growing summer season to a dark band, and that corresponds with the winter, their first winter, right? So we have the fish being born here, growing fast in its first year, and then slowing down during its first winter. And that's when the fish turns 1 year old. Right? Fun fact about fish, all fish have the same birthday. They all turn another year older on January 1st. So it doesn't matter when they were born. All of them have the same birthday, January 1st. So January 1st comes around and this fish is now 1. And then the next year it grows a little more, slows down in winter. It's 2, it's 3, 4, 5. And then this is the little edge here is the amount of growing it did from January 1st of last year, 2025, until Tom caught it and I took its ear bones out. So, so this is a 5-year-old perch. So that's how you age a perch otolith. Yeah. Now you're all experts in it. So this is going to be some of the data that we collected and analyzed. We got perch in a range of ages, all the way from only 1 year old, all the way up to 6 years old. So the oldest perch that we got, we had about 4 of them. Yeah, 4 of them there that were 6 years old. One of the things we can look at is what's called length at age, and that's how long a fish is at different years in its life. And that can tell us about how fast it's growing. And also if there is a lot of a good distinction between different lengths, sometimes you can estimate the age of a fish just by looking at how long it is, right? You don't have to cut its head off and dig its ear bones out and section them out. You can just guess from the length, right? So this is the length at age for our perch. We have 2 different lakes here. Purple is Ontario, Lake Ontario perch, and then the teal color is Cayuga Lake. And as you can see from this graph, age, length, the fish are getting longer as they get older, which is cutting edge science. So they get bigger as they grow. But really what I'm looking at here is the amount of overlap in age or in length at different ages. There's actually quite a lot of overlap. So for example, a perch, and I have it in millimeters over here on the left for the scientists, and the inches over here on the right for, you know, normal people, not people that deal in millimeters. But a perch who is 10 inches long, I mean, that could be a 1-year-old perch all the way up to a 5-year-old perch in this data set, right? So you can't really tell how old a perch is just by looking at how long it is. Some perch are going to grow really quickly and reach a large size fast. Some of them are going to grow really slowly and stay small for a long time. It probably depends a lot on the individual perch's genetics, what they're eating, where they're living, how stressed out they are. So there's actually quite a bit of variation in growth. One of the other interesting things about yellow perch is that they have sexual dimorphism, which means that the females and the males will grow at different rates. And female yellow perch grow a lot faster and get bigger than the males do. So that could be contributing to some of the overlap as well. Since we didn't have the guts of all of our fish, we don't have sexes for all of them. But that's something I'm hoping to collect more data on in the future, trying to see if we're seeing differences in the females and the males here. Between the 2 lakes, we didn't find a difference. So one of the things we were interested in looking at is, are there, you know, bigger fish in one lake versus the other? Are fish growing at a faster rate in one lake versus the other? And we didn't find a difference between Ontario or Cayuga. So they were similar ages, similar sizes for the 2 different lakes. The largest fish that we caught was actually a 5-year-old. So a 5-year-old fish was 13.5 inches from Lake Ontario. So it's a big perch, right? Perch are a small fish. So a 13-inch perch is a big perch. That was a 5-year-old from Lake Ontario. So on average, there was a lot of variation in growth rate, but on average, a perch grew about 3/4 of an inch a year from ages 1 to ages 6. So this is similar data, but now we're looking at weight at age. So instead of length at age, we're just looking at weight. Here we have Lake Ontario fish only, because I only had whole fish from Lake Ontario. So we could only take weight from the whole fish. And just like with length, there's actually a lot of overlap between the ages, right? So not much of a distinction between the different ages. It seems like individual growth rates, behaviors, health is probably, and genetics is probably driving a lot of the trends in growth rate in perch. This is a length-weight relationship. So here we're actually looking at length on the x-axis and then weight of perch on the y. And this is one of the things we can calculate from this is a number called Fulton's K condition factor. It's kind of like BMI for fish. So it just tells you, you know, how chonky a fish is for its length. Our Fulton's K for Lake Ontario perch for this year was 1.44, which on its own tells you not very much. But the nice thing about it is that over the years, we can track this number and see if the fish are you know, getting skinny or staying nice and chonky.
And that's a good way to track the health of the fish over the years. If for some reason that they are getting stressed out, they're not getting enough food, then this number might start to go down and we might start to get concerned, right? So this is more like a baseline that we can track into the future. Okay, so this one's gonna get a little mathy. So stick with me. But these are called catch curves. And catch curves are a way to estimate mortality rates from fish. So basically trying to figure out what proportion of fish die every year from various causes, right? And how we do a catch curve is we put age on the x-axis and then a measure of how many fish we caught of that age on the y. For ages 1 and 2 here, I know the points are kind of light, but we have a pretty low catch rate for age 1s, a lowish catch rate for age 2. That's probably because age 1 and 2 are not really being caught by anglers all that often. A lot of them are probably still pretty small. They're getting tossed back. They might even be small enough that they're not really biting on your hook. So we exclude those from the analysis. So we're only looking here at ages 3 to 6, which is what we call fully recruited to the fishery. Like they're being caught at a rate that's probably proportional to what they are out in the environment, right? So by looking at the downward slope of this line, we can get an estimate of how many fish that are age 3, how many survive to age 4, how many survive to age 5, how many survive to age 6, et cetera, et cetera. And by looking at the slope of that line, we can get an idea of the proportion of fish that make it from year to year at these ages, right? Our average mortality rate for both Cayuga Lake and Lake Ontario together is 57%. So what that means is that about 57% of the perch between ages 3 and 6 die every year out in the lake. And this is combined natural and fishing mortality. So this could be from natural sources like disease or predation, getting eaten by a walleye or something like that, or being fished out of the lake. Right, so it's a combined sources of mortality. So this is another one where it's a number that we want to track over time. And if we see this number start to change, if the mortality rate starts to go up, then we might be concerned that this population is either having some sort of struggles from a natural source of mortality like disease or starvation. Or maybe that they're getting fished really hard. And so our fishing mortality is maybe too high, right? So another numbers that we have a good baseline of now, and we're going to track going forward in the future. So in conclusion, yellow perch, length and weight, highly variable. So we can't actually really predict how old a fish is from how big it is. Seems like yellow perch grow at different rates, probably due to genetics and behavior and differences in diet and things like that. The mortality rate is, I would say, moderately high. So it's pretty high. It's higher than some of the other published standards, but not as high as some like really historically overfished populations like Southern Lake Michigan, for example. So something we're going to keep an eye on and just see if it changes through year to year. And in general, just tracking differences over years and between lakes for this type of data is going to help us learn more about the commercial fishery and the populations of perch that we are eating. This is my dad with his trophy yellow perch that he caught on Oneida. I believe the only perch he's ever caught in his life, but anyway. And so for that, I want to thank all my students that helped me collect this data, especially Dana and Makara, who did their senior projects on it. My Zoo 441 students who did a bunch of the data too. Stacy Fergal, who was my fish matchmaker, and then of course, Tom Allen, who provided the fish. So I'm happy to answer a couple questions if we have time. Okay, great, thanks. Okay. Yeah.
So anybody with a recreational fishing permit can sell commercially?
Yes.
And so
And in Jefferson County, there is no size limit or limit on how many you can catch.
so like, for example, right, like I can go out like in a paddle boat.
Yes.
August and
Yes.
catch as many perch as I want, throw them, let sit in the hot sun and then bring them to market after that.
Now for that one, you gotta ask Tom Allen. I don't know if, does he have any processing? I don't know why I'm asking you this.
So I would say that one would fall, would fall on the processor purchasing that fish.
Yeah.
They are required to make sure they're
Mhm.
purchasing safe fish.
Yeah.
So they would need to require their producer to take
Have a
precautions.
yeah.
So they might be the ones doing that. And I think Tom is actually the processor and the one catching?
Yeah, for these fish, he catches
yeah,
and
so
processes.
He's familiar with HACCP and the requirements. There should be processing fish, right? That's a requirement, and that would fall on whoever's sourcing that product and subject to the seafood HACCP regulation would then impose the requirements on their supply.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
so you're right that the angler does not have any liability,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah, but
processor does.
processors,
Yeah, and the processors are, they're like certified and trained. to
They
things, but
want
the
certain
anglers-
sizes that like, they don't wanna pay for small fish.
No.
They'll pay you more for like 9 up or 9 inches up or whatever, and they're obviously gonna know like if the fish hair wasn't good, then they might not buy from you anyway.
Gotcha. So I guess maybe to follow up on that one
Yeah.
is so like the very few commercial like licensed operators in here, like it must be interesting dynamic.
Yeah, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy or anybody else who knows, there's a couple licenses active, but only one person actually fishing that
I
license.
think there are 4 total.
Yes.
Permit
Mhm.
licenses, and there were 2 active, and one of those recently has gone in. So on Lake Ontario, it's only one. Lake
1%.
Erie is-
Yes, yeah, I think there's one commercial fisherman up in Jefferson County.
And the state is not issuing new commercial licenses, and Peter can correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
like, they're gone type thing.
Because our Great Lakes fisheries are much more skewing towards being managed as recreational fisheries now.
Gotcha.
That's kind of it. The Canadian side is different. They
Yeah.
still have larger commercial fishing. But here in New York, we're leaning towards rec.
So it's so different from the marine world.
Yes.
Like if you want to sell fish, it's a very highly regulated.
When I
Good luck,
first-
you got your license.
When I first found out about this, I was like, that can't be the case. Like, this is wild, but no, it is,
You'll see
yeah,
other stuff too, like
Mhm.
locally, you'll see bullhead dinner.
yeah,
It's caught by somebody on the bank with a fish
Interesting.
pole, yeah. So-
yeah. And I've gotten some like bluegill and crappies and stuff from
Yep.
Tom as
Yeah,
well.
I'll listen to those.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah,
Online?
question from Chip Cotton at Cobblestone.
Mhm.
Do you see a future where other species are sold by recreational anglers like the yellow perch market? Wondering if this could work for walleye or salmon.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah, you can answer that if you want.
So the only fish that you can sell are fish that don't have a size limit. So while I have a size limit, they would never be included that. Same with the salmon. So basically it's relegated to things like yellow perch, bullhead, some of your other panfish, bluegills, pumpkin seeds, and that's about it, so.
And I thought a season too, right? If that has close season.
Yes, I believe so, but most of the fish that with no size limit also don't have a,
Haven't, no.
yeah, so they like go hand in hand, basically.
All right, we gotta transition to our next speaker, but Ellen, we'll be around for
Yeah,
that.
find me if you have
So
more
we have
questions.
more questions later. So next up. And Ellen introduced Tom. Tom is one of our sponsors. All the yellow perch you'll be tasting today was donated by Tom and prepared by both Moira and Chef Jeff will do a demo in a bit. But Moira is with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Ontario County, and I'm going to just transition to share the website, and she's going to walk through the wild table. I don't know if you want to do a little introduction while I pull this up.
Sure, and then I'll probably sit in that chair so
Yep.
I can go through it. So, good afternoon, everybody. People call me Mo, and I'm with Cornell Cooperative Extension, which is the land grant side of Sea Grant. So we have programming in agriculture, youth development, 4-H, community economic development, nutrition programs and local food programs, and some Department of Environmental Conservation and Resources in that way. So today I want to explain to you a program called the Wild Harvest Table that we started a while back that brings together community nutrition education and natural resources and conservation education. So I think the easiest way is to kind of walk you through the website with a little history, a little bit about research as we go through it. So this started it started in 2009 as an education. Can you guys all hear me when I'm sitting down? Yeah. Okay. It started as an educational resource.
Fix the share screen though.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep, you're good.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. As an educational resource for people basically what we were hearing anecdotally is a lot of people would fish or hunt, but maybe their family members didn't necessarily like the food that was prepared from it. It was too gamey, it was too fishy. Also, as a nutritionist, maybe the go-to for fish was fried fish. So we were trying to create a resource that was a little bit healthier, got people to explore new recipes, new creations, and things like that. So this came to light, came to bear, and the very first recipe, it has this handy dandy search function. So it was chowder. Oops. In 2009. Let's see. Sorry, I got to get used to a new laptop here. So here we go. Ice fishing for perch chowder. So the recipe is pretty delicious, but it also had ways to make it healthier, right? So instead of bacon, you could use olive oil. Instead of whole half and half, you could use evaporated milk. Of course, many of you might have heard our dietary guidelines just got flipped upside down recently, so saturated fat and bacon are maybe okay. They're back in. But the point is to give people resources to eat whole food, right? To learn how to cook, to learn how to prepare it, and eat less processed food. So eating fresh local fish is a great way to do that. Eating wild game is a great way to do that. And so this is how this came about. Because it is an extension program, we often have a lot of translational research that comes into the programs that we do. I believe Barry mentioned how when you're working with the aquaculture farmers, research ideas popped up. And so how to pair researchers with those things that come to bear. And so we found when I was creating all my little nutrition fact labels down here, that a lot of the species that we fish for and hunt are not actually listed in the National Nutrient Database. So we could not make accurate nutrition fact labels because we didn't have the accurate information for, say, yellow perch or brook trout, which we actually fixed. So under the educator resources tab over here, we have some of these things, actually in the research tab. So we did some sleuthing and we found out that a lot of species weren't actually in the National Nutrient Database. If you want to read more about that, you could look at the paper about addressing information gaps in wild-caught fish. So we set out to get some money and work with researchers at Cornell, and we collected data on brook trout, which is our national fish. And we also got Canada goose, ruffed grouse, and eastern wild turkey. And we were able to collect those species and have them added to the National Nutrient Database. So now if you look under fish and you go to trout, and if we want to find a brook trout recipe, I love brook trout. Of course, it's a very delicate fish and you have to, it's healthy. It was at the top of your list in terms of a healthy fish to eat, but the fishery needs to be treated gently. You don't want to eat too many of them. But we were able to get the actual nutrition facts for brook trout now. So that was pretty cool. Another thing that we realized also in starting this was that a lot of, how many of you are familiar with R3, recruit, retrain, recruit, reactivate, and retain for hunting and angling? Some people. Okay, so basically it's people who fish and hunt and boat and do shooting sports and purchase equipment and purchase licenses, and all that money goes into conservation, but less people are doing it. And so we want to maybe use the food as a way to get people into fishing, into hunting for food. So we find that if people share some delicious food at the table and say, hey, you know, I just fished this out of Q Lake today. You should come with me next week. You get more people doing it, or you get people reinvigorated to go do it as well. So there are also some papers on that. If you're interested, you could find those on the research tab here about leveraging the locavore movement for recruitment, retention, and reactivation of anglers. The final sort of research project that came out of this is also recognizing, and Audrey touched upon it, that there's a lot of therapeutic benefit just getting outside and being on the water and fishing and interacting with nature, interacting with the fish, whether you eat them or put them back. And so we've done a lot of work with veterans and veteran programs. And so there is, not to geek out, but I am a little bit. There's another peer-reviewed journal article about how when you take veterans out on therapeutic outings, that when you actually take the fish that they caught and show them how to prepare it and process it, and they go through to eating it, they ultimately had a better experience in their outdoor recreation. So you can read about that one here. And then if you just, want to get veterans out there or get other groups out there, there's lots of booklets. Again, it's extension. These are all free resources. The beautiful thing is there's no pop-up ads when you're trying to find a recipe. I don't know about you. That drives me nuts when I'm online trying to find recipes. So there's some booklets here that you can access and print, including wild game, and then there's fish booklets as well. So those are all available. And today, the recipe that I brought, because we're looking at perch, and those were big, beautiful perch fillets. So it's, some people call it poor man's shrimp, but it's basically perch cocktail. And what's this guy? Normally, I catch little guys on Cayuga Lake, so maybe one fillet is the little shrimpy guy, but so I chunked these up a little bit, but here's the recipe. It's a great thing. Again, it's a great thing to share if you have new people that you're exposing to wild caught fish. And it's pretty easy to make. It's just basically you create a nice brine with the Old Bay seasoning and some onion and lemon and garlic and some salt and cracked pepper. Boil that up, put the fish in it, and they're all chilled, and we'll try it later with some lemon and some cocktail sauce. So that is basically the web resource that's available for you all to take a look at for when you catch something and you want to learn how to maybe make it in a new and unique way away from the fish fry. Of course, fish is super healthy. It's brain food. We're supposed to eat at least a couple servings a week that are healthy and not contaminated and all that good stuff. So this is here as a resource for you all. That was pretty quick. I think I caught us up on some time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions or anything online too? Nothing? All right, you're all hungry.
I know.
All right, well, thank you.
All right,
Laura.
thank you.
All right, so next up, our final presentation for today is Jeff Doloff from Touche in Syracuse. And Jeff is actually going to be doing a demonstration on some of this perch that has been donated by Tom. So I will pull up our.
Hi, everybody. I don't have a formal type of slideshow or anything like that. So if you actually just want to come closer, you're more than welcome to. Just to kind of tell you about myself. I'm originally from Oswego, New York. So a lot of these resources are like super cool because I grew up here and having a better understanding it now that I'm not a young little kid anymore that doesn't appreciate the fine attributes that Lake Ontario or Oswego really has. Gives me a much better insight in terms of what I do on a daily basis. With that being said, I own a restaurant in Armory Square in downtown Syracuse. Our main goal of the restaurant in general is that we're a whole animal butchery restaurant. So we either buy most of our product from New York State. I try to get everything as close as we possibly can and develop as many relationships as I can with local farmers, and whether it's produce, whether it's grains, whether it's animals, just in general. And then we try to use everything that we possibly can from those. So we either get them whole, halves, or quarter configurations. I have a full butcher table and bandsaw downstairs, and everything gets processed. And then we write our menus based on what we can get our hands on, not necessarily what we would like to do at any given time. So you won't find like strawberries for Valentine's Day because it's not happening here in New York State. And if we can't get something from the localized area, because obviously winter could start in September and it could end in May. So who really knows around here anymore? If it comes from not from New York, we try to get it from a more reputable source or something that kind of follows along with our guidelines. I've known Ellen for a few years now, so she approached me with the idea of speaking here with you all today, and it was an immediate yes for me. Seafood has always been something that's been near and dear to my heart, whether it's growing up here or just on a more national level with the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch program, Fish Choice, the Marine Stewardship Council. I've done a lot of work with them and have tried to get as much knowledge from any of those resources as I possibly can. So when this idea and obviously with the perch being donated, I was like, this is a perfect opportunity. With that being said, the perch was fantastic. I'm growing up and working in local restaurants here. Anytime that I'd come across perch, they'd be like itty bitty tiny things, and it'd be fishermen coming off of Lake Ontario, and they're like, do something with this. And it's like, this is a lot of fish, and they're all really tiny, so we're gonna fry it. And that's generally the basis of my knowledge when it comes to perch. So when I actually saw how much larger these fillets were, I was like, this is going to be easy. And it's great because the recipe that you did show is a chowder, and that's kind of what I kind of streamlined with you all today. Not only is it something that I can make quick and everyone can get a bunch of it, but it's also something that you can do at home with very limited knowledge and very limited kind of ingredients, or it's just pretty much you can do the whole thing in a pot and not have to worry about it. And considering how cold it's been for the past few days, why not? So I prepared most of this at the restaurant, just so this is a very quick thing, so I can just make it and you guys can eat it as quickly as possible. So if you bear with me as I pull it out, I can chat and talk at the same time. Part of what we do at the restaurant is we have a chef's counter where we have 7 seats that you can actually come up and we make an entire tasting menu in front of you because we have a completely open kitchen. There isn't any like windows or doors to kind of hide behind. So everything is cooked right in front of you on a day-to-day basis anyway. So this is actually quite comfortable for me to do because it's what I'm going to do in like an hour from now for other people. So this chowder is super simple. Nearly all of these ingredients are, including the fish, from New York State, so this is very easy. For the sake of this, I made a base of the chowder, and because we buy a lot of seafood out of Maine through Brown Trading Group, or Sopo Seafood, or Wolffish out of Massachusetts, I actually made a fish stock using some fluke to not only enhance the flavor of everything, but to make it a very true chowder. And the only preparation that I've actually done with the fish in general, and it's kind of a cool thing that you should probably do anyway when you have fish, is I just salted it for about 20 minutes. What that actually does is draw a lot of the moisture out of the fish. Not only does it help sometimes when you start talking about Atlantic seafood, kind of kill some parasites and things like that to help pull them out, especially if you've ever had cod, and then you get those lovely cod worms. Not that they're going to do anything to you, but they look gross, and then the salt kind of gets them to pull out of the fish into there, or monkfish. Because not every commercial processor will pull those little codworms out or the little parasites into there. So sometimes I'm just like, it's gross, and they move around, and they're not really dead when you get them. But not only does it pull the water out, it kills some parasites, but it also concentrates the fish flavor. So whether it's salmon, whether it's a whitefish, or whether it's mackerel, it hastens the cooking process. There's less like splatter when you go to cook something in a pan, whether it's oil or you're trying to sear that skin. It dries it out quickly, and it just enhances the flavor in general. We also have bacon, some fingerling potatoes, leeks, and just some parsley to kind of go in there. So to make this easy as possible, I'm literally going to dump all of this into a pot, heat it up, and then you guys can try it as soon as possible. So even at home, a basic chowder recipe is going to say use bacon, some type of fat, whether it is, render it out, remove it, and then you use the drippings and the fat into there, add some flour, make a roux, and then start adding your liquid to that. And then that is the basis of all chowder. Chowder is originally a recipe designed for fishermen, where they would go out, get their day's catch, and then they can actually make it on the boat. So that way, by the time they were coming back into the shore, the soup would be done, and then because they're cold and kind of wet and tired, it's just hearty, and it's one of those let's put some meat on your bones type things. And then you have different variants, whether it's supino or bouillabaisse or I think the other one is like the San Francisco chowder, where it's more of tomatoes and more liquid, and not so much of the flour or cream into that. So I made the base of that, where I rendered the bacon out, made the roux, and then actually took the fish stock that I made with the fish bones. And that's another cool thing, just in general. Not so much with trout or salmon or anything like that, but any of the fish that you do catch, whether it's perch or walleye or bass, or those bones are actually more usable than you think that they are. Just taking all of the skeletons, the heads or the carcasses from it, not so much the guts. But if you clean those, just rinse them off, put them in a pot with some vegetable scraps and let it simmer for like 20 minutes. You have like the cheapest, most flavorful stock that you could possibly use when it comes to actually making soups at home. And that can go with chickens, that can go with beef, anything like that, but more predominantly with fish. It just makes everything taste that much better rather than just using water. And you have the ability to control the amount of salt intake that you're getting. Because typically when you buy the stocks or the bouillabaisse or the bouillon cubes from the grocery store, you have no control of how much sodium is actually into that. And because inherently that is just rendered animal product with salt, and that's all that is, you're just consuming a salty morsel that has a tiny bit of flavor to it. It's gonna be a little noisy until it kind of cools down, but that's okay. The only raw product that's in this is actually the fish itself. Because if I had pre-cooked the fish ahead of time, it would just kind of fall apart and we wouldn't really get the true sense of the textural point into this. So the fish was brined for about 30 minutes and then rinsed off, just with ice water to kind of stop the quote unquote cooking process that happens with salt. So what I'll do is I'll heat the liquid up and then add the fish to that, which should really only take about 5 minutes once all this is kind of brought up to temperature. And then it'll prevent it from overcooking, and then we can just kind of ladle it out and you guys can take it and be on your merry way. And then while we're waiting for this, I can answer any questions. We don't really have much more to actually talk about, other than just restaurant and food in general. So by all means, just shout them out. I'll answer as best as I can while we're doing this. Well, it depends on what your term exotic really means. To me, there really isn't anything that I would consider exotic or anything that I wouldn't eat on my own. I don't usually turn down any type of food when it comes to that, or let alone cooking something. Obviously, if you've been to the New York State Fair, they have that one booth where they have like the fried kangaroo and like alligator. And at that point, all of those proteins taste the same because they're just frying them on a stick, and then you don't really get the true sense of that. But if you are a hunter or an angler, like I'm talking beaver, turtle soup, all of these things are very, very interesting. And chances are, if you've had it done the wrong way, you'll never eat it again. So it's really finding someone who's like, have some turtle soup. And your first question is, what is that going to taste like? And there really isn't an answer for that. You just kind of have to try it. And then you kind of determine whether or not you do or don't like it. Personally, that is one thing that I don't like very much. Snapping turtle is typically used for it. And anytime that you eat a predator animal, they have a tendency to be not great. Bear meat is another one where it's kind of like if it's young, it's fantastic. But once you get into the older ages with bear, not only do they typically have parasites that don't get destroyed when you cook them. And I'm sure you've come across hunters and stuff like that, or typically the larger bears. You can actually see the parasites sometimes, and they're like very, very long and
Well done.
yeah, there's not, and then, but mostly a lot of hunters with bear typically eat the lower portion or the legs, and then they save the fat because bear fat is actually a really good runner product, and you can use it not only as a cooking or a frying application, but you actually have some mechanical applications with bear fat because you can use it as grease for metals and brass and things like that too. Seafood wise, I'll eat anything. I'll try it at least once. Typically because we're getting seafood out of the northern Atlantic, there aren't a whole lot of exotic fisheries anymore or exotic fish that kind of get consumed. I did buy some sturgeon out of the Pacific Northwest a few months ago, and that was something that people typically don't get to try because it is technically a byproduct of the caviar industry. It's because it is a protected fish in New York and pretty much everywhere in Atlantic sturgeon is, but because it is a byproduct and they are farm raising it, and they have to be anywhere between 5 and 7 years old before they actually produce eggs. I was like, I'll take 2 under the guise that I was going to get like a small, but it actually was like this big and it was cut into massive chunks, and I was like, okay, because it was like that big around, and it was like,
For everybody.
yes, it was about 100 pounds of sturgeon, and I was like, cool. I mean, thankfully, it's an inexpensive product because it is a byproduct.
What does it taste like?
Sturgeon is very fatty. Typically, what ends up happening to it is they smoke it, much like a smoked salmon, like a hard smoke, so it's cooked all the way through. But it has a wonderful, delicate flavor to it. Once you get past like the 1/4 inch thick skin that it has, and the layer of kind of like fat that exists underneath that as well, it ends up being a very delicate fish. If you're a fan of mackerel or anchovies or sardines, sturgeon is just a bigger version of those. So it lends itself to pan frying, it lends itself to frying, it lends itself to just grilling and a lot of hearty or strong marinades to kind of cut through that. So if you're not really happy with fatty fish, I'd stay away from that. I kind of like use salmon as the base level of like, do you like fatty fish? Do you like salmon? Yes or no? Other than that, like when we bring in mackerel, it's my favorite fish to kind of consume. Is typically I'm like, if you don't like that, there's a good chance you're not going to like this just because of how strong it is. Typically with fatty fish like that, it gets difficult because their shelf life has a very short lifespan because of the amount of oil that's in there. But ironically, or not, if I get in whole mackerel and they still have the guts in them because it is a fragile fish, it typically lasts longer with the guts in it than it does with the guts out. Can't really explain why, not really sure. I think it's because it rots from the inside out, that the organs typically go quick and the rest of the meat has a tendency to stay a little bit more applicable, but if it works, it works. Shark is the one thing that I have a tendency to stay away from, not only because I refuse to eat it, just because of the overfishery, the shark fin, and it's like a fish that is deemed like not that great, and everyone has like the fear mongering with it and that. But I'm a huge fan of sharks. I remember writing a letter to Bill Clinton as a kid, being like, "You should stop. You should cut fishing for sharks out altogether." He did respond, not with like a good answer, but he did respond to it. But it's very fatty and it's very strong. So if you're not a fan of swordfish, shark is another one of those like you typically want to stay away from. And is also loaded with mercury. It's loaded with parasites, and it's really hard to get away with it because of like little fish get eaten by larger fish, and those fish get eaten by so it kind of concentrates itself. For the restaurant in general, I buy a lot of fish that are deemed best practices or good alternatives with the Seafood Watch program. That is another app that you can easily download or go to the website, and it's loaded with tons of information. And I'm gathering, now that I've seen your projects, I'm gathering that's how they kind of measure that data with the DEC in more of a larger scale with fishery projects, because that is one thing that I think the public generally doesn't have a good understanding of how those decisions get made. And then a lot of conversations that I'm sure that you have with, or that you have with, when it comes to fishermen and scientists who make that data set, typically don't agree with each other. Not that I imagine anyone talks to cod fishermen, but that would be a number one reason for cod fishermen is to not listen to scientists because they go out and see how plentiful fish stocks are. But that's not a good oversight or a good idea of like what a good representation of things are. But at the restaurant, because I buy a lot from the Portland fish auctions, and that's how typically we would get Atlantic cod, despite the fact that there is no commercial fishery in the United States for it anymore. It is recreational fishermen or a bycatch, and they come in and sell it to commercial industries, and that's how I'm able to purchase it. And that kind of is talked about in terms of like, as a restaurant owner or someone in the food service industry, why some of these topics aren't applicable to me, because I don't really have access to a lot of those resources, not only from a health perspective and the health department, but it comes from a processing perspective. As much as I would love for hunters to kind of come in and be like, hey, I just got this huge buck, like, can you use some of the meat? No, I can't, because I don't know how you processed it, and I don't know how you got it to someone else and how they process it without any type of real kind of resource management or an applicable record keeping. I do know that there are quote unquote loopholes, and like it's not really a loophole if I need to bring like a health inspector out into the middle of the woods to say that that's okay, because I don't know any regional health inspector who's going to go do that. But I do know there are other resources from other states, particularly with wild boar, because they're actually caught alive. And then they're processed in an actual US state facility, and that's how it's sold, and that's why you're able to find something like that in the grocery store as opposed to deer. Yes.
Speaking of wild boar, like, are you able to work in, or is there, I know it's not necessarily New York State, but like, I'm always interested in like eating the invasive species. Point, you know?
So this is probably a good question for you at the same exact time, because I do know that boar exist in literally every state in the United States. They live on pretty much every single province of Canada. They're actually found in Hawaii, and it is quite an elusive and invasive species. And I do know in New York State specifically, if you do come across them, despite them being an invasive species, the recommendation is to not do anything, because if you miss, they just kind of spread and disperse later into other areas. In terms of invasive species from that standpoint, Texas is really the only state in the United States that has a rule that allows you to go out and kind of trap them alive and then have them processed. There are federal guidelines because at one point in time, you could catch things, and if you brought it to a processor alive, they would process it. And then there is like this weird kind of grandstand law because, believe it or not, horse meat in the United States at one point in time was a huge export. Texas being the largest exporter in the state, and France being the #1 importer for horse meat. Technically, you can bring a horse to a processor by federal law, but it's up to the processor whether or not they will do it. And that's kind of how it kind of goes with everything else. I can't imagine that trapping a live deer in New York State and bringing it to a processor is legal, let alone finding a processor who would do it. Because respectively, processors in general are far and few between in New York State, as most of them are kind of shutting down. Not only do people not want to do that anymore, but the market for them is quite limited. The insurance is quite high, and because a lot of the products that we consume in grocery stores are all being purchased by large scale processors, and it's becoming more of a commodity market than it is a regional small market, unless you're butchering chickens yourself. And then even that, the amount of red tape for a small scale processor, unfortunately, is the same amount of red tape that Tyson has, because they're considered farms. So therefore, if they try to pass regulations on those places, it affects small scale farms in the same exact capacity. And because, not to get too political in this aspect, but due to our current administration in terms of policy, regulations are allowing a lot of these large scale facilities to self-regulate and self-govern themselves,
So not only will that kind of limit what small scale processors in New York State do on their own, or lack thereof on their own, because there just aren't enough USDA agents anymore to kind of go around, because each state generally only has two. And to have them kind of travel from place to place to place gets very limited, and there just aren't enough resources anymore to do that. So as much as I would love to help destroy invasive species as a restaurant, I can't. It's completely out of my hands unless there's a magical loophole, or law that kind of changes things to allow us to kind of utilize that. Because obviously the age-old conversation is, why would I go to a restaurant when I could do it myself? But the lack of education, which is fantastic for your website, it will help kind of get more people into do that. Because while as healthy fish is and shellfish are, it's expensive for people to do at the grocery store, and a lot of people don't have the education to be like, I'm going to spend the money to bring it home and ruin it myself. So I'll go somewhere else to eat it. But something as simple as this, where all you got to do is dice up the fish and put it into a pot like this, and then walk away from it for about 10 minutes. It's actually quite easy in itself, in its own. So I'm gonna just pour that into here and let the residual heat of the liquid itself cook the fish to its appropriate temperature, what still has texture, size, and a flavor to it. And then I'll turn it off and just spread it out for you all. These are just some leeks, or early spring garlic, spring greens. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of greenery available at this time of the year. With that being said, I work with a lot of farmers that do have a lot of hoop houses and are available in the state. Norwich is one of them. They're based out of Norwich, New York. They have a lot of hoop houses. So they're able to grow produce throughout the entire year. And then if I can't get it, I will get it from another resource down south if it has good good agriculture practices that represent the restaurant as a whole in itself too. And that's pretty much it. We're in the waiting game for this to kind of cook the fish through, and then I will start divvying it out. And if no one has any other questions, I'll just stand here and look pretty.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Any questions? All right, so while that's finishing up, we'll do a couple raffles. So get your tickets out, right? Again, these are for our door prizes. We've got our Eat New York Seafood Squid sweatshirt, oyster buffs, and our Eat New York Seafood insulated tote. We've got 2 for today. And remember, if you complete our Seafood Summit evaluation, it'll take you to another form where you can fill in your information, right? And that is disconnected from the evaluation, so it's still anonymous. You can enter your information there, and you'll be entered into a second raffle. Did everyone get their ticket? Everyone sign in and get a ticket? All right. So have those tickets handy. And then before I do that, I want to announce so that once we're done, once we do the raffle, the Chef's Dept is ready. You can start tasting the chowder. In the back of the room on the table here to the right, we've got a variety of drinks. We've got some seltzer water, some cold brew coffee. There's some chips. There's some kelp crunch. So we have a few seaweed-based products here for you to try. There are a variety of, or there's a lot of interest in increasing seaweed production domestically throughout the U.S., but also in New York. These are not New York products because we don't have a lot of commercial processing and food-based products being made with our sugar kelp, but they are some of the options and some of the different diversity of products that are out there. All Maine Coast Sea Vegetable, which is a company in Maine, makes the kelp crunch, which you can try. Then there is 2 types of salsa, kelp pickles, and no, there's no hot sauce. There is hot sauce as well. All made with a variety of different kelp species on the West Coast from Barnacle Foods. Barnacle Foods. So that's there to try. We have 2 different preparations of steelhead trout. This is farm steelhead trout from Hudson Valley Fisheries, which is a land-based or circulating system. Barry did show a picture of that up there. There's a hot smoked and a cold smoked option for you to try. And then there's just some cheese, crackers, chips, oranges, if you want to be a little healthier, as well as Moira's perch cocktail. All right, ready? First winner, 448-552. All right, and we have one more. Remember, fill out that evaluation. You'll have the opportunity to bring it up. All right, second, 448-533. 33. 533. All right, well, 448-535. 448-542. All right. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, any of the resources over here, fair game. You're welcome to take. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. Most are for myself, Barry, or Stacy. I think Department of Health has some resources out on the registration table. So some of those resources they introduced earlier, they are available here today. And for our online participants, we thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, you can't join us in the snacking. But you sign up already. All right. All right. Well, yes, I'm gonna grab that in a second. And for your bag, or your sweatshirt in there, if you want a different size, just some. Yes, I will stop this. I also, my contact is here. I also have cards over on the table. So I'm going to go next evaluation. If you don't find one of the cards, you can do it there. That's another chance to win. I'm just going to stop our recording. I'm going to stop our video, but you guys are welcome to go help yourself in the back. Start with that and then make your way up once Chef Jeff is ready to try the chowder.
Chef Jeff, would it be useful to pull up like how to make stock? Because it's on the website. You talked about it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You want just a visual?
Let me end the Zoom real quick. Where is it? Oh, there it is.